I'm just checking this bolt to make sure that this little replaceable derailleur hanger is good. I'm going to pull this derailleur off because we're going to clean it. It's easier to do off the bike. I'm going to really inspect things, and I'm also going to check the rear derailleur hanger alignment and make sure it is still perfectly square to the frame, so the derailleur is shifting perfectly on the gears. It's not all bent or cockeyed and trying to shift the chain all wrong and goofy and causing problems. Woohoo! I do like to save the old cables and housing, because sometimes it's good for measurement. If you're not really sure, you can hold that piece up and be like, oh yeah, that piece is perfect, and I'll just cut the new one to that exact size. Wipe some dirt off. Sometimes when doing overhauls, you just strip the entire bike down to the bare frame, clean everything, clean all the parts, either all together in a parts washer the wrong way, or by hand, slowly, one at a time the right way, which no one does. But since this bike's big and in the way, I don't have a lot of space, and we're going to be filming these videos and doing one thing at a time, I'm probably going to leave it mostly together and just do one thing at a time, because there's no reason not to. I guess there's more likely you'll forget something, but I always like to touch everything, look at everything, double check everything. Rarely ever forget anything. Get pretty focused on the old bikes. So while we're here, we might as well do the derailleur alignment. There are a lot of tools for this. This is my favorite. It's the Abbey Bike Tools HAG hanger alignment gauge. It's probably one of the most expensive ones you can get, and I saved it when I sold my shop because I just couldn't really live with anything cheaper. Cheaper stuff is fine, sometimes, for some things. It's totally cool. But when you get up into 9, 10, 11 speed stuff, it's just so tight and so finicky. It's not that fun. Now with this, you really want a perfectly true wheel, so you can make sure this thing's aligned at all points. But there's a trick. You only need the wheel to be true. Just find a spot. This works for a lot of things. You can just go right to the tube. Set this little dude right up against the tube. So we're right here. It's got a little arm. It's scraping the tire right here. And as long as they go around together everywhere, oh, look at that. That's like a 1/2 inch gap over here. 1/2 inch gap over here. 1/2 inch gap over here, and it really only touches over here, so this thing is not aligned. I'm going to double check, make sure this wheel is in perfectly straight, because put the wheel in crooked, then align it to a crooked wheel, it's no good. So the first thing I'm going to do is do all 4 corners. So right now, the back, we're going to come all the way around, and I'm just going to give this guy a little tweak, bend, it's a little closer. I don't want to bend it too much, it's aluminum, it's not happy. Didn't do much. Tweak. Okay, now it's about a 1/4 inch gap. Still too big. I go tweak. Reset this. Make sure it's nice and the little rod's perfect and just scraping the wheel. Oh, it's perfect and scraping the wheel. We'll come up high. Little bit of a gap, and it means there should be a real tight spot down here. Real tight spot down here, so I'm just going to pull it up a little. We've already got it set front and rear, or left and right, so now we know we don't have to adjust this again, we just need it to fit just right up and down. It's so close. Now it's perfect. So on the up and down, it's perfect. The left and right or forward and back, still perfect. Just barely scrapes everywhere. So now we know this guy is set correctly, and the derailleur will be perfectly aligned, as long as the derailleur is not bent or destroyed. This is an often overlooked step. On vintage bikes, you could just jam a tool onto the derailleur, just bend the whole thing up and get it close. Full friction shifter bikes, it didn't really matter so much. People didn't really care. But with modern bikes, it's good, and you can buy a new one of these for, I think, like 15 to 30 bucks, unfortunately. So you can always replace it if you damage or break it, On modern bike tours, if you go with a group, they'll usually try and talk you into buying an extra one of these and bringing it. That's just such an emergency. Luckily, this wheel looks really true to the eye, but later on we'll go through and we'll grease the hubs, replace all the bearings, make sure the spoke tension's good, make sure it's true, make sure it's round. We'll do all that stuff, get it all clean before it goes back on the bike. So we're going to keep stripping this bike. It's got a kickstand that's along here, horribly and loosely and awkwardly. I'm going to go ahead and just strip that while we're at it. We'll probably clean it up and put it back on and reuse it because it's already on there. And seems like it's fine. This bike wants fenders. This is going to have to go though. There's just no real room. Most people don't care about kickstands anymore. Let's check these pedals. We're just going to grab them, hold the arm stiff, grab the pedal and try and wiggle them back and forth on these bearings. So the pedals, even though they're cheap and ugly, that one feels fine. Still spin. This one's got a little play, they're cheap and ugly, but it's probably fine. The pedals are probably fine, we can knock them out. Ah, my good pedal wrench is not here. So the driver's side one is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. The non-drive one is opposite. You have to be real careful because you're trying to fight these and trying to get leverage. So you can hold this back arm and push down this arm. Be careful not to punch these chain rings. I do it almost every time. It is unpleasant. Because they are just little knives, basically. One pedal down. So we're going to go righty-loosey instead of righty-tighty. And the reason why it's reverse threaded is because just the natural forces of riding a bike and pedaling would make this one always come loose if it was normal righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. The bottom bracket is also threaded reverse on one side for the exact same reason. The bottom bracket is a sealed cartridge. See if I can get it to wiggle or creak. If it doesn't, it's probably fine. We can pull it out just to re-grease it to help guarantee it won't creak. Or since it's sealed, we can probably leave it in and test ride it. And if it creaks, then we can pull it out and lube it. It's no harm, no foul. It's not hard to pull off or anything. So we will probably do that. We'll go around and check all these crank bolts. Same thing, unless they creak, there's not really any reason to pull them apart now. On a true overhaul, I guess we would pull the whole thing apart and grease it, but there's also a good chance we'll get to that point on this anyways. You never really want to extra tighten these bolts to hold the cranks on. These cranks are a square taper, so they're like a square, but they're slightly pyramid shaped. Same with these arms, so when you press them on, it's a force fit. They force fit on snug, and you can stretch them out and damage them and make them creak or come loose or fall off. And once they've come loose or fallen off, they're dead. You need to buy whole new cranks. It's lots of money. It's not a good time. Well, these cranks are long for a tiny bike. That's pretty funny. Front derailleurs is the same way. They're a nightmare to set up, so I don't usually take them off. Sort of clean around them, unless I really want to get the whole thing perfectly spotless for no reason and try and put it back in the same spot. So I'll usually start here and just adjust as needed. So I'll just spray this down and get little brushes on. Maybe we'll just clean up this whole area now too, and then we'll move on to the brakes and the front. If this were a cup and cone bottom bracket, like an older one that has like removable bearings, I pull it all apart, clean them, grease them, put new bearings in, that sort of thing. But this one's too easy to bother. But we are going to remove this cable and housing for the front derailleur. Wow, bud. Someone's a psychopath. That's outrageously tight. Just be old and sticky. This could mean I really am going to pull it all off and clean it. But we'll see. Alright. These go through a little plastic guide on the bottom that we'll wipe down. I ordered new brake pads. These ones look fine, but they're probably really old and hard, corroded, so it doesn't matter. let's get in here and just do some cheating. Spray on some degreaser everywhere. And we'll just get in here and wipe it down lazily. And just wipe it in around all the stays and the frame and around the welds and all the places that are hard to get into and reach, especially the cables in the way. Make it look nicer, make it look clean and new. This bike was like $500 brand new. I'm probably only going to ask 3 or 4 for it, totally overhauled. And totally overhauled is going to be nicer than it was new, so make sure everything was actually right. Or when things were new, they were just slapped together in a factory in China. And most new bikes, things are not right. If you don't service the bearings immediately, right out of the box, brand new, they will be dead within a few months because they're all way too tight, way too loose, don't have any grease at all. Like, they're just wild coming from a slave labor minimum wage factory in China. It's weird that no one cares. They're just trying to sell you an idea. They don't really need it to hold up. In fact, if it doesn't hold up, it means you'll buy another one faster. These rings are already really clean. If they're really dirty and greasy and gross, I'd definitely pull them off and scrape them. I kind of find it cathartic to take a screwdriver and to scrape all the layers of gunk and grease and built up nonsense off of the chain rings and parts. Things are more fun to clean when they're really dirty, so it's really satisfying. And we will go ahead and lube all this stuff. We're putting it all back together and doing the tune-up. Make sure all the little pivots and all the little moving points have just a little bit of like chain lube in them. And we'll wipe off the extra, because all extra lube does is attract dirt and grease. Make things kick up and get worse. Yeah, this is totally good enough for now. So now we're going to move on to the front. So in the front we're going to basically the same thing. We're going to open the brakes, these little V-brakes. You just pull this noodle, pop this little slot down, and it opens right up. Pop the front wheel out, it's got lawyer lips, so even though it's got a quick release, you still have to loosen it up, give it a lot of adjustment. Because some lawyer somewhere sometimes said you had to. We're going to go ahead and continue with the boringness of the just sort of spraying and wiping some stuff down. This bike is pretty clean because I took it outside and hosed it off, because it looked like it has been sitting in someone's garage for about 10 years. Basically got a tune-up, barely rode it, and then just put it away, never touched it again. Pop the cables and housings out of the little quick releasey guides. Cut the cable tips off so we can slide these cables all the way out. See, it's all just bundled up on that. Might as well do the same thing for the brakes while we're here. Always put your tools away. Go ahead and get these grips off. Pull this stem out and make sure. That's a scary thing on old bikes. Been sitting for a long time. Sometimes the stems can sort of rust into place here, and boy, if they do, you're really in trouble. Same with the seat posts. The first thing you do, you check if you buy an old bike that's been sitting for a while, or any old bike, is make sure the stem and the seat posts aren't frozen in place. Hey, look at that! It fell right down, not frozen in place, but you can see whatever grease was on there is basically just turned into a rust pudding now. And it probably would have sooner or later. Disconnect this brake. Oh my gosh. Ugh. There we go. There we go. Real tight. So I worked on this last was He-Man. I'm guilty of doing that myself because I don't like things to slip. I'm a heavy guy. Panic stop, I can make things slip. This also has these stupid power modulator, like anti-lock brake kind of things on it. I really think they're probably junk. I think I've always hated them and thrown them away in the very few times I've seen them. So I might just put some regular V-brake noodles on, or I might cheap out and just put these back on. These levers are very big and very leveragey. I don't think it's going to need them. I might have had really crappy levers from the factory, so I might have upgraded to these. All the cables and housing. Free. Time to pop these brakes apart and get them off. Yeah, let's keep pulling parts. Basically ended up disassembling most of it all at once anyways. Wow, okay. I'm going to switch to a real Allen wrench, just because these things are so tight, I think I'm less likely to strip them and get more leverage. Yeah. 3-way is a great tool for most little jobs. Sometimes you gotta get the big guys out. Strip, pulling out bolts. That's a lot. Not actually stripping the bolts, I'm just taking them off. Stripping is when you pull the threads off and totally destroy them, and it's a real drag when you're all bummed out. You need to go spend 40 bucks on some new brakes. Alright, those aren't rusted on at all. They look like they're still pretty smooth. Look at the cleaning and new pads. We'll do the same on the front. Alright, now on to the front brakes. Show it a little clearer. There's a bolt on the side, and that basically lets you loosen and adjust the pads, or pull it all the way off and pull the whole pads off. A little teeny bolt down here that just takes a screwdriver head and it adjusts the tension against the spring. So if your brakes are sitting way too far over, big gap on this side, rubbing the wheel on this side, you can tighten this one spring or loosen that one spring and move them both over and even it. You can also take the spring out and bend it by hand if it's really extreme. And these front bolts, where it takes the brake actually off the bike. Now loosen those. These are called V-brakes. They share the same mount as like a cantilever brake, would also mount on a post like this in the same spot. The V-brakes are this taller style with this little loop on the top. And they add a lot of mechanical advantage and make your bike stop a lot better. They do pull a different amount of lever pull, so they need a different mechanical advantage, so a different amount of cable pull. So what you have to do is get matching levers. You try and mix and match some old flat bar levers for candy brakes and some V-brake stuff, or vice versa. So get parts that do not work well and do not stop at all. I've done it, everyone's done it. People want to do it all the time because there's just a million V-brake levers out there. They're always trying to flat bar their old road bike. It will not work and you will regret it. Now we're just going to clean around these guys a little bit. Get this old grease and gunk off. Get out of there, dirt. Same thing on the back. All the dirt around them off. No, there's nothing in the way. Get this grease off. Clean and nice, none of them were damaged or weird. I suppose the next thing to do is going to be this headset. So there's bearings on the top and bottom. It's a press-in cup full of bearings. And then this fork actually comes all the way up through and threads into the top. So you tighten the bearings, get adjusted on this fork steerer, compressing the whole thing so the fork can turn nice and buttery smooth like it is, without any place. You want to grab the front of the fork, grab the bar and stem, grab the frame, and try and wiggle the fork back and forth. If you get any wiggling and clunking out of it, then your headset is too loose. If it's really hard to turn or you feel any ratcheting or notching, your headset's too tight. But this headset, it's perfect. Heard this last time, fantastic job. Often with this old style threaded one, when it threads on the top, this top nut will bottom out on the fork before it can pinch on the headset, and your headset will always come loose. It's a huge problem amateurs have. And what it means is you need to put another spacer in here so it can compress down the spacer and on its own self, the headset, instead of ending up on the inside fork threads. And as you can see, if I can clean some of this grease out. I'll show you. You can see in here this little layer of white grease that is between this fork, which is this inner steel tube. It stops right here, and the top of this nut, which stops right there. So there's a little gap that's full of grease, and that gap is what you want and need to make sure this thing's all adjusted correctly and not bottoming out. If there's no gap and this nut was touching the top of this fork, then you'd never get the headset tight, because the tightener nut is getting stopped. Basically like a door stop, never letting you get your door closed. So how we get this headset apart is with a headset wrench. It's 32 millimeters. Most old 1-inch threaded headsets are 32 millimeters. You can hold this bottom cup. The top's also 32, but I kind of feel like you end up marring this nice surface on the top if you use that. So I usually use an old thick park wrench. They make a special one, but I don't have one right now. So I'm going to use this giant adjustable, and you can just twist it loose. Then you can unthread this top nut. Underneath that is a locking spacer. So it's just really a toothed washer. You can see it's got just a little tooth on the top. And then the actual fork itself on the threads has a little slot filed in for the toothed washer to fit on. That way when you put it back together, you just thread it down, get the bearing adjustment you want, and in theory, put the nut on and just tighten it right down. Kind of usually hold this guy, tighten the nut down, and it won't move and make your bearings too tight. Also, sometimes forks aren't quite right, and you have to add an extra spacer or two in here, like we've been talking about quite a bit. So, after we took the top nut off, we have this second nut, which is also the bearing race on the inside, so it's a little concave with a little race. You can kind of see it in there, that shiny silver bit, that's right where the bearings roll across. It's concave to fit them perfectly. And this gets the bearing adjustment set just tight by threading this down onto the bearings and pinching everything, and then the little tooth washer holds it in place, and then the lock nut locks all down so it doesn't loosen or tighten on us. We're pulling it out, and these bearings look pretty clean and nice. We're just going to clean them up and re-grease them. Same thing with the ones on the top. I'm going to clean the head tube on the bike first with the bearings sat, top and bottom. I'm using like a lint-free paper towel, basically, like a special shop towel. You really don't want to use real rags for cleaning bearings because you don't want to get them full of lint, getting stuck in the grease and causing issues. If I was doing free bearings, I would, like I'm going to do with the hubs, I'm going to use like a clean plate and do it on the plate so nothing's going to get in there. And be very careful and do it with clean hands. Try not to touch it with anything, even a lint-free towel. Same thing with the ones on the fork, but it's a little dirtier. I'm going to sort of pull it apart and play with them a little better. Spray in there where the bearings go and all around, so we don't really want any dirt. Just rubbing a rag, clean spot in there, getting all the degreaser out, getting any dried grease, any contaminants or dirt. It's kind of a cheap headset, it doesn't really have any seals. A lot of headsets will have a seal or two, some layers of stuff in there. Got to make sure the seal gets cleaned and the seal goes back in. You can see these guys are just a little dirty, and this grease is kind of old, it's a little sticky, it's a little cruddy. So to carefully go around. Kind of turns into wax, and then it's not really doing its job. Then as the bearings spin, they're just sort of digging in because they're not actually lubed, because all the grease is off to the side, pretending to be wax. I've definitely had things that were so hard I had to chip the wax out of the bearing surface, a little screwdriver and a hammer, just to be able to get it clean. See, they're pretty clean on the inside. That should be totally full of grease. So, I put this together last time. It looked like they used like a white lithium grease, which is a very popular fad at shops, but I think is really not good enough for unsealed headsets. And I really like using a marine grade grease, made for bearing spinning, made for high temps, but really waterproof. So it acts as its own seal. Doesn't let the grease get blown out. Bottom one, it's quite a bit dirtier, but also has quite a bit more grease in it. If this were a real high-end headset, we'd soak these and use a little acid brush and try and rinse them off with water a few times, like really get them clean. This thing's already so clean, and it's not very high-end, and it doesn't really matter. So now the head tube's all clean. The first thing we do is prep it, get it ready for the stuff to come back in. So I'm going to take this little syringe I filled full of grease, put grease, whoop, all around where those bearings are going to go. We'll do the same thing on the bottom. Come in from the underside, squeeze some more grease in. It's finding its little air bubbles. It's getting all over it. Just mush it around. We're going to do the same thing to the fork crown. Get it pre-set up. Nice fresh grease. Then we can drop a bearing on. If we were really nice, we'd rub it all in, get it all full of grease. It's a lot on the top, it's a lot in here, put a little bit more on. Should have plenty to roll around and play with. Drop this top bearing in. Same thing, we'll rub some more grease up in it, everywhere stuff can touch, where it can roll around, where it can really get stuck in there. I've also got this little top race, should have prepped it. Whoa! Fill it full of grease for the bearings to run around on, be all happy with. Also get grease on the threads, because why wouldn't you? Keep things greased up, keep them from galling. Nice and greasy on these threads. The bottom bearings on the fork, top bearings in the headset, up on the frame. Slide this guy in. Spin this guy on. Find big threads are weird. Sometimes you go backwards a little bit from the catch. Once it catches, you can thread it on like normal. You can do a fun thing. We put it down to spin the whole fork. This is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey like most things, and I just fan it till it's stopped. Drop the little lock ring on. We got the lock nut. It's got a little fresh grease in there too. I'm going to start this guy gently. Never force threads because you can damage things. Now it spins nice. There's no play. Doesn't feel too loose. We're not going to final tighten it until the wheel, the stem and everything's on, so we're really grabbing and some leverage to make sure there's no play. And that's when we'll do the final tightening. Nice and greased up.